knowing you more. Help us to continue just being in your presence and receiving your word as Chris speaks to us this morning. Amen.
Amen. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Good morning. It's really, really wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for having us. As Daniel said, if we've not met, my name is Chris, and my wife, Caroline, next door, she'll probably already be running after our little 2-year-old Theo, whilst holding our 6-month-old Jessie. So I've probably got like the easy end of the deal this morning, being able to be in here with you guys. So thank you for that. We've been, as a family, just so excited and looking forward to coming and being with you here this morning. We love this church. It really feels like home for us. It really feels like family. As Daniel said, we both came to this church as teenagers, basically, as children, and we're so grateful for all the input and the opportunity that we were afforded here at this church and how many of you blessed us so much. But it's such a joy that those friendships really do feel deeply rooted and genuine and long-lasting, and it's been so wonderful this weekend just to catch up with friends, old and new, and it really does feel like home. And there's such a strong sense of connection and family, kind of relationally for us, but also just between our churches. So part of what I'm up to, as Danielle said, is that I spend my time leading the worship team at a church called King's Community Church in Southampton. And part of what we've been up to this year is launching a worship training program for churches to send their worship leaders, their worship team leaders, musicians, to come and gather in a room together that we might learn from them, they might learn from us, people doing the same stuff, and you may or may not know that your church has been a part of that. So it's been wonderful this year to connect with the likes of Lucy and Johnny as they've come down. Steph and Danny came down for one. It was great. Meeting Iona, she came down to join us as part of that. It's been really fruitful, hopefully a blessing to them. It's certainly been a blessing for us to have them. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was at a festival that New Frontiers put on called New Day to serve young people across the New Frontiers family. It was really cool there, again, chatting with Iona, who was there serving Open Doors, I think, and Junior was there, catching up with the Jubilee Wirral youth. It's just wonderful to connect with people and genuinely such a sense of friendship. Long story short, we love this church. We love you guys, so thank you so much for having us. Thank you for having me to speak this morning. It's a genuine privilege. If you have a Bible, we're going to be in Luke chapter 19 today. So why don't you turn there with me, open the app on your phone, more likely maybe. Luke 19, 1 to 10. Very simply, I'm just going to read it to us, and then let's see what it has to say to us. Luke 19, verses 1 to 10. Jesus entered Jericho and made his way through the town. There was a man there named Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector in the region, and he'd become very rich. He had tried to get a look at Jesus, but he was too short to see over the crowd, so he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree beside the road, for Jesus was going to pass that way. When Jesus came by, he looked up at Zacchaeus and called him by name. "Zacchaeus," he said, "quick, come down. I must be a guest in your home today." Zacchaeus quickly climbed down and took Jesus to his house. In great excitement and joy, the people were displeased. "He's gone to be the guest of a notorious sinner," they grumbled. Meanwhile, Zacchaeus stood before the Lord and said, "I will give half my wealth to the poor, Lord, and if I've cheated people on their taxes, I'll give them back 4 times as much." Jesus responded, "Salvation has come to this home today, for this man has shown himself to be a true son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save those who were lost." I want you to think for a moment, and this sounds like a bit of a nasty question. Well, it is a bit of a nasty question. Think for a moment, who are the least popular, perhaps least highly regarded, typically, stereotypically, people in our society, in our culture? Now, that is a bit of a mean question, so don't dwell on it for too long. But here's a couple of suggestions while you're thinking from me, ranging from the not so serious to maybe the more serious. So firstly, parking enforcement officers. Now, I want to say, if there's anyone here today who spends their life as a parking enforcement officer, I take my hat off to you because you do a very, very noble job. And I think I take my hat off to you mostly because you know how unpopular you are as you go about your job. So we all know, don't we, that it's the right thing to do to pay for parking. We know that's just a rule. It's a given. We all know that if we don't pay for parking, we think, oh, I might just be able to get away with it. It's only 5 minutes. We think, oh, I might just be able to get away with this one. And in the distance, we might see somebody putting a parking penalty on our windscreen. They're just doing their job, but we can't help but take all of that rage and sense of injustice. Why do bad things happen to good people? We take all of our anger out on that poor person who's just doing their job, don't we? But they're hugely unpopular as they go about their job, bless them. It's not fair, is it? Secondly, over the last couple of years, I think we've seen a huge public outcry of resentment and displeasure towards those who have maybe been hypocritical when they're in positions of leadership, positions of responsibility. Maybe they set rules, they say one thing, but then their actions don't live up to it themselves. And suddenly, people can become like public enemy number one, and the media can be all over them and their families, and it's really unpleasant. But people suddenly, their popularity just plummets through the floor. People who may well have been well respected before, suddenly just hugely unpopular. The character that we see Jesus encountering in the scripture that we just read was a hugely unpopular, despised man in his society. The kind of person that no one wanted to associate with. No one wanted to have anything to do with him whatsoever. And imagine if Jesus was in town, there's no way that he would ever end up at Zacchaeus' house, would he? Perhaps if you're hearing this story for the first time today, or maybe you've grown up it's like a Sunday school story, isn't it? Maybe you've grown up hearing this story. You think, at first glance, it's a fun story about a little guy who has to climb a tree to see Jesus. But as with many stories in the Bible, there's perhaps more going on underneath the surface than we first might realize and give it credit for. And I trust there's more for us to see this morning that we might not have seen before. So what we're going to do, just a bit of background for this story. How does this encounter between Jesus and Zacchaeus up in this tree, how does this encounter come about? And then I just want to draw out 2 points from their conversation, their encounter, and see actually they apply to us in our conversations, our encounters with Jesus. So a bit of background. Luke 19, verse 1. There was a man named Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector in the region. He had become very rich. So at this point in Luke's gospel, Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. And here he's passing through this place called Jericho. Now, the whole nation of Israel at this moment in history is actually occupied territory. So it's a country living under the authority and the rule of a foreign power, the Roman Empire. And one of the ways that the Romans would exercise their control, stamp their authority, make their presence known in this occupied territory would be that they would employ local people to become tax collectors on their behalf. And these tax collectors were like traitors to their own people. They became loathed on account of what they were doing. They completely sold their souls to the Romans and had betrayed their own people, and by often charging more tax than was actually due, they would then pocket the extra for themselves. So they're thieves, aren't they? It's this theft. And in a culture where people would have lived hand to mouth, these tax collectors are literally taking food out of the mouths of people to line their own pockets. Can you see why this person, Zacchaeus, might have been just a little bit unpopular, not particularly liked? This isn't just a slightly unpopular poor parking officer. No, this is a really, really nasty guy. And this man, Zacchaeus, he was not only a tax collector, but we read, didn't we, that he was the chief tax collector. So in this hierarchy of corrupt, greedy, unpopular, rich traitors, Zacchaeus was the worst of them all. The most greedy, the most corrupt. Even criminals would have looked down on this guy. That's the weight of dislike there would have been against him. And perhaps that's why we see the crowd, the people, struggling to grasp, to understand, why on earth is Jesus going to spend time with Zacchaeus? Does he not know what Zacchaeus has been up to? Does he not get it? Does he not understand? And we see the crowd, don't we, not letting Zacchaeus through to see Jesus, because Zacchaeus can't get through the crowd to see Jesus. But we might think that's just because he's a small little guy. But actually, if this guy was a small, rich, but respected, honorable member of society, you might imagine the crowd might part the way, let this guy through. We need to let this guy see Jesus. But no, you can almost imagine, can't you, the crowd like standing shoulder to shoulder. Don't let this guy through. It's Zacchaeus. Block him out. So Zacchaeus' only option, as we read, is to think a bit creatively, climb a tree. We can only assume that he'd heard something about Jesus. Maybe he'd caught wind of a few stories of there's this guy going around performing miracles, healing people. So his only option is to climb a tree because he's desperate just to catch a glimpse. We can only assume. So much so he's ready to humiliate himself, I guess, by climbing this tree. And it's here in this slightly comedy setup, man up a tree, Jesus walking past, that we see this conversation, this encounter between the two happen. And I just want to spend the rest of the time this morning just drawing 2 points from their encounter. And as I said, just look at how they also apply to us in our encounters with Jesus. So first of all, Jesus calls us by name. Jesus calls us by name. Verse 5, we read, when Jesus came by, he looked up at Zacchaeus and called him by name. Zacchaeus, he said, quick, come down. I must be a guest in your home today. I want to share a humbling story of when I was at school. So on the first day back after summer holidays, which I guess is like tomorrow, isn't it? Or like this week, people are going back to school. So on one of the years when I was at secondary school and I was going back to school after the summer, I was in a line, it's a big school, and I'm in a line of hundreds of students waiting to go into assembly. And I was probably talking to a friend next to me, and just like, probably to my horror in that moment, I just heard the head teacher of the school, who's quite a daunting character, been at the school a long time. I heard him just very loudly, above like the noise of all the chatter, just shout 2 words. And he shouted the words, Johnston, which is my surname, by the way, Johnston, haircut. I'd been like singled out amongst a crowd of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students. Johnston, haircut. And that was it. I was sent off the school premises. I was told to go away and only return when I had a haircut that was more, I don't know, fitting of the school uniform policy, that I wasn't bringing such disrepute to the school through my choice of haircut. But I was sent off, told only to return when I've sorted myself out. But the power and the authority of being called out by name, like, how does he know my name? Me out of all these people. Why has he singled me out? He knows my name. There's something very, very personal, isn't there, about somebody knowing your name. They know who I am. Imagine if someone that you've only met once or twice just to come up to you and call you out by name. Makes you feel known and seen. Oh, that person, they really care. They've gotten to know me. Well, now imagine if somebody you've never met before, if we've never met, imagine if I were to come up to you after this morning's meeting and I were to call you out by name. You might be actually a little taken aback, mightn't you? You might think, oh, hang on, what's gone on here? How does this person know who I am? I've never met you before. What's going on? How do you know who I am? But you'd also be a bit curious, wouldn't you? You want to know, well, how do you know? And what's made you call me out? And I need to get to know what's going on here a little bit more. Friends, the truth for us today is that no matter how near to or far from God we feel, God knows us and calls each of us by name. Just as Jesus looked up and saw Zacchaeus and called him by name, God sees each of us today. In this moment, he sees us at 11:30, sat in the hub building of Jubilee Church, Liverpool, and knows us by name and calls us by name. In Isaiah 43, God says to his people, I've called you by name, you are mine. What a comfort that is for those of us who know Jesus. That whatever situation in life we're going through at the moment, whatever season we're in, whether we're in the best season of life we've ever been in, more fruitful than ever, or whether we're in like the toughest circumstances we've ever found ourselves in, we are seen and known by a God who calls us by name, who knows us. He set out a path before us, and he holds everything together in his hands. But also, that's the truth for those people who don't yet know Jesus. Maybe that's you today. Or maybe you've got friends who don't yet know Jesus. People who might feel like they're sort of on the edge looking in, that they're not to be accepted. They might feel like Zacchaeus, just on account of the wrong stuff that they've done in their life. I don't know if I can get close to Jesus. No, God calls all of us by name. He knows each of us. He sees us and he knows us. He knows your history. He knows your story. He knows everything that's happened in your life up to this point. He knows everything that you might think might disqualify you from knowing Jesus, and yet he still calls you by name. Do you know, in calling Zacchaeus out by name, do you know the name Zacchaeus means pure? There's irony there, isn't there? Zacchaeus would have felt anything but pure. He'd have known that he wasn't a pure guy. He would have known that he was a thief, an extortionist. He would have known that he wasn't liked on account of what he was doing. But Jesus, just in a moment, in calling his name, in speaking the word pure over him, he reshapes and redefines his identity, saying, you're no longer who you were, who you have been up to this point. I'm giving you a new identity. You're who I always intended you to be in the first place. And after Jesus called Zacchaeus by name, what did he say next? He said, I must be a guest in your home today. Now think again. So in that scenario where we've not met, If I were to come up to you and call you out by name, you're already a bit taken aback. How do you know who I am? If I were to then follow that up by saying, and what's for lunch today? Like, what have you got in the oven for us? Well, I'm coming to your home. I must be a guest in your home today. Like, I've stepped beyond being a bit weird, and that's just rude, isn't it? I can't just assume an invite to your place. So as with a name, to enjoy a meal together in someone's home, it's a very personal thing, isn't it? It's to invite someone into your personal space to eat, to talk, to share fellowship together. And in the culture that Zacchaeus is in, just even more so, someone's home to be brought into the center of their lives, their family dynamic, significant. And you can see that significance just through the shock and the horror of the crowd. Does he realize where he's going? This is Zacchaeus' house. Why would he want to go there? So why does Jesus do it? Jesus often meets people where they're at in their location. So here in Luke 19, Jesus goes to Zacchaeus' house. Or in Matthew 4, Peter's mending his fishing nets, and Jesus goes to his location and meets him and says, "Come, follow me." Or earlier in Luke's gospel, Levi, he's working in a tax booth, another tax collector. Not a good job, not a popular guy again. Jesus goes to meet him where he's at and goes to his location. Jesus comes to your location. He meets you where you're at. Jesus doesn't elevate himself and stand up somewhere high and says, "Oh, everyone, I've got something important to say, so come over here, listen to me. I'm only going to say this once. I'm not going to travel around to all of you because I don't have time for that. You come to me, and I've got something important to say, so come here, and I'm going to say something." No, he doesn't do that. Of all the people that could have elevated themselves, it could have been Jesus, but Jesus doesn't do that. What does he do? Jesus spent his life walking around, meeting people, encountering people, engaging with people, having conversations with people, having meals with people, talking with people, getting to know people, their situations, perhaps sitting alongside people, perhaps talking with people, engaging with them, seeing how they're doing, saying, "Addy, I see you, I know you, I've called you by name. You are mine. I know your story, everything in your life. I know where you're at the moment. I know everything you're going through, and I'm with you. I know your hopes, your dreams for the future. I'm with you. Trust me." And he may have got up and sat with someone else, spent time with people, engaging in conversation. Jesus meets us where we're at. Whether you're high up a tree, leaning in to see Jesus, whether you're in a tax booth of shame, whether you're hurt, worried, lonely, anxious, he comes to sit with you. "Hey, I'll come to your place for dinner." He's not distant. He's prepared to travel. If he was willing to give up the most glorious life of majesty, intimacy with God the Father and the Spirit in heaven, if he was willing to come down to a stable and be born, he's prepared to travel the extra few hundred meters to come to you, to meet you where you are. So question, where are you right now? How are you doing? What's going on in your life? Maybe you're on the front foot, just ready to go, your hands raised in worship, feeling like your prayer life is on fire, you're encountering God in the scriptures. Yeah, that's where I'm at. Or maybe you feel like you're putting on a brave face. Maybe you feel like you're holding it together, but there are tears ready to fall. You're joining in with the songs, but deep down, there's stuff going on. Maybe you feel like just over the last few weeks, you come and you listen to messages like Mary's and Junior's on just navigating the storms of life, and you feel like, do you know what? I feel like I'm in the eye of a storm. I'm right in the midst of a storm. I feel like I'm sinking, I'm drowning in the midst of a storm. Wherever you are, Jesus comes to your location. And not just once. It's not like he came to me at an amazing conference that I was at, or a church weekend away, or when we had a jubilation evening, or one time God came to me and I encountered him there. But just since then, I feel like I've just drifted, and it's been hard to get back to there, and I just feel like I'm kind of going along with emotions. If I could just maybe just work to get my way back there to God, maybe I'll be able to find him there. No, he comes to you. He comes to you again and again and again, whatever stage of life you're at, whatever your age. Jesus comes to meet you in your school or university or college or workplace or community or household. He comes to you. You haven't got to go anywhere to find him. You haven't got to come to church. You haven't got to come to your midweek group to find him. He comes to you. However unlikely you feel that it is, he would come to you. You of all people, you don't know what's going on in my life. You don't know the ways that I've messed up. Even this week, if I were to look at my week, I'm stuck in patterns of sin, and I just know I'm not prioritizing the right things, and I know I'm not investing in my relationship with God enough. But look at Zacchaeus, total sinner, rejected by society, hated. Jesus calls him by name, goes to his house. Whatever your location is today, he finds you and he comes to you. Revelation 3 says, Jesus says, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come and eat with that person and they with me. And where does Jesus' encounter with Zacchaeus end up? Well, Jesus says to Zacchaeus, salvation has come to this house today. Salvation comes for Zacchaeus because Jesus first called him out by name and met with him in his location. Salvation can come to our lives because Jesus calls us out by name in the crowd, comes to our location and meets us where we're at. So firstly, Jesus calls us by name. Secondly, Jesus transforms our lives. Jesus transforms our lives. We read, didn't we? Zacchaeus stood before the Lord and he said, I will give half of my wealth to the poor, Lord, and if I've cheated people on their taxes, I will give them back 4 times as much. Knowing Jesus means that our priorities, our values, completely change. So in some places in the Bible, it's called being born again. You become a new person when you meet Jesus. You now have a new power through the Holy Spirit. You have a new Lord in Jesus. You have a new set of desires within you. You don't want to keep living the way that you used to. You want to change. You want to be different. You want to be like Jesus, not so that he might love you, but because he already has. Not so that he might forgive you, but because he already does. Or not so that he would be pleased with you on account of what you're doing, but because Jesus has already drawn close to you and called you a friend. I know that we could go around this room today and hear story after story after story of how Jesus has transformed lives. People who would say, I used to live like this, and then I met Jesus, and now I live like this. Completely different than I was before. In Ezekiel 36, it says, I will give you a new heart. I'll put a new spirit in you. I'll remove your heart of stone, and I'll put in a heart of flesh. This was the case for Zacchaeus. Before, he was so hard-hearted. And on encountering Jesus, he totally changes, completely transformed. He becomes tender-hearted. He becomes compassionate. He wanted to give back what he'd stolen. And why? Why would he want to change? Maybe you're one of those people who doesn't like change. Some of us don't like change. Why would I want to change? I'm quite happy the way I am, thanks. You might think that your life is doing okay, and I don't want to change the way that I'm living. Or you might think, fine, I've been around church for a while. I'm willing to give maybe 95% of my life and who I am and my values over to Jesus, but there's just this little 5% that I want to keep just stored in my pocket and keep a bit of a tight fist around because that's really important to me, that stuff. I'm just not willing to give it all over to Jesus. But, 95% is pretty good, isn't it? In Matthew, we read that the kingdom of God is like a pearl, so valuable, so precious, that when you find it, you can't help but sell all that you have on account to get it. It's that valuable. Jesus is that precious that everything else that we have, that we can cling on to, keep in our pocket, it's insignificant compared to him. And on truly seeing his worth, our response is to give everything in order to gain him. Suddenly, Zacchaeus, without prompting, it seems, he just understands. He gets it. He understands the sinful nature of the way he's been living, that what he's been doing has been wrong. He understands the corruption of how he's gained his wealth, his money. He understands that to live for Jesus is to turn away from an old sinful life and to make dramatic changes in how you live your life. So what did he say? He said, I will give half my wealth to the poor, Lord, and if I've cheated people on their taxes, I will give them back 4 times as much. He gives away almost everything he has because money is no longer his God. Jesus is. So he gives away half, just in an instant, gives away half, and then he restores 4-fold. Let's do the maths for a moment. If you like numbers, this will be for you. If you don't, just stick with me. Let's do the maths. So imagine he was a millionaire. So he just gives away 500,000, half of it gone in an instant. Let's imagine he'd then ripped off 100 people £1,000 each. Well, £1,000 times 100 people is £100,000. Times that by 4, £400,000, because he gives it back fourfold. So he's just given away £900,000 of his £1 million fortune. So he's just given away 9/10 of what he'd spent his life amassing, because his whole life has been changed by Jesus. Jesus transforms our lives. And when we come to know Jesus, when we put our trust in him and we allow our whole lives to be transformed by him, we suddenly find that those things which used to motivate us, which used to give us a sense of worth, that used to define us, they become dead to us. They no longer have a power over us. Maybe just patterns of behavior that we couldn't seem to get out of. Addiction. Their power over you just becomes broken. And not just that, but you find that the things now that you do want, they're also defined by God's will for your life, God's purposes for your life. It's not only is the power of sin being broken, I don't want to do the stuff that I used to, you find you're wanting to do new things that you weren't even wanting to do before. Now I find myself wanting to spend time reading the Bible, getting to know God's word. What does he say to us? I find myself wanting to spend time in prayer, just in conversation with the Father. I find myself wanting to know more of his plans and his purposes and not my own. I find myself caught up in his fervent passion and desire for his church. Suddenly your worldview, it isn't centered anymore around what's your plan for my life? What am I going to do? Which our culture is obsessed with. But it turns to, God, what are your plans? What are your purposes? And where might I fit in with that? What are you doing, Lord? You find yourself all of a sudden just broken by the things that break God's heart in a way that you never would have previously. I would never have cared about that. Now it just moves me emotionally. God's plans and purposes are to make his presence and his glory known on earth, to make his glory known across this amazing city, to reach the thousands and thousands upon thousands of lost, broken people. And we can think, God, how are we going to do that? That feels like a big task, right? How on earth do we do that? It feels overwhelming to reach a whole city. How can we do that? Well, as we've already said, God calls out individual people by name. God is about people. How do we, God's people, reach a city? We reach people one person, one heart at a time. Do you know in Woolton, there's this one street, Seafarers Drive. On that street, there are so many broken people. Just house after house on that street of people who are lost, people who don't know Jesus, people stuck in patterns of sin, people finding their identity in the wrong stuff, people who are just broken, no hope. How are we going to reach Seafarers Drive in Woolton? Roddy and Jilly Peel. What if we could just place them on that street, in that community, to bring light, to get to know people, to connect with people, to share God's heart, where there's darkness to bring light to it, where there's all sorts of confusion just to bring God's hope, to connect with people and bring them on a journey of finding Jesus, just one person at a time. Or do you know in town on Chapel Street, there's these offices of quite a big, significant consultancy company. They work in sort of engineering industry, big construction design projects, millions and millions of pounds go through their projects. People who work there, they're influential, significant, very skilled, very gifted, very clever people. But amidst that, there's a lostness to them. It's people with all sorts of capabilities, but some of them are finding their whole identity in that, or maybe in the money they might have, or the brain that they might have, the qualifications that they might have. And they might get home after a day at work, and again, there's just a sense of maybe loneliness, or anxiety, lostness, feeling like they don't have a greater purpose. Just imagine the potential if we could reach the gifted people who work there at this environment. How are we going to do that together as church? Well, I know Nat Morris has those skills. She's got those qualifications. She's got the brain to be able to do that. She's skilled and gifted in these things. Why don't we place her in that environment to work there? Do you know, it says in Acts, doesn't it? God says that he places people exactly where he's to place them for a purpose. Nothing happens. It doesn't happen by accident. Why don't we place her there to have influence, to shape that workplace culture, to bring light to it again? Or do you know there's this school, Chilwell Primary School, full of wonderful children with such gifting, potential, such life, such character, going to go on to do amazing things. Some of them from excellent homes, amazing homes. Some of them from really broken homes. Some of them from really tragic circumstances. Some of them going home each day after school to situations that would make you sick, that would make you cry. How are we going to reach that school? How are we going to help? I know, just one girl starting there this week, Ari Matthewman. Let's place her in that environment, that she grows up around classmates. She might just bring life and joy and hope to those around her. Let's place her in a church community here where she's going to have people teaching her on Sundays, that she's able to take that to the playground. Do you know, some great revival started with young people. Friends, the point is this in each of these examples. God has called each and every one of you by name. He singles you out of the crowd, just like Zacchaeus. He meets you where you're at in your location, sits alongside you. And if you know Jesus, he's able to transform your lives, to realign your desires, your motivations, your heart, so that you are sold out, living all in for him, to see his kingdom come to your world around you. How are you going to respond to Jesus today, in light of him calling you by name? In light of him inviting you to know him, inviting you to give your all to him, not to hold anything back in your pocket, but to give everything over to him. For Zacchaeus, what did he have to give up? It was his wealth, it was his money. There was something very practical, actually, he needed to do. He needed to go and right his wrongs. For you, it might be something different. What is it that you know you can cling on to, that you can place too much value on? Could be anything. It might be success, relationships, qualifications, whatever it is. And whatever it is, Jesus is worth giving up everything for. Jesus said, didn't he, in what we read, for the Son of Man came to seek and save, who? Those who are lost. And in that sentence, Jesus is summing up everything that he was about as he's on his way to Jerusalem to die on the cross. That's the journey he's on here as he's going through Jericho. He declares to Zacchaeus and declares to us too that Jesus came to seek and save those who were lost.